dangerous as hell. Those are Ted Cruz's words, the senator speaking out about Trump's FCC chairman Brendan Carr and his threats to ABC to deal with Jimmy Kimmel the easy way, or it would be done the hard way. Here's Cruz.
Look, I like Brendan Carr. He's a good guy. He's the chairman of the FCC. I work closely with him. But what he said there is dangerous as hell. He says, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way.
Yeah.
And I got to say, that's right out of Goodfellas. That's right out of a mafioso coming into a bar going, nice bar you have here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it.
Okay, well, there it is. As we've said from the beginning, this is what it is. And tonight, Trump is not happy with his friend, Senator Ted Cruz.
I think Brendan Carr is a courageous person. I think Brendan Carr is a great American patriot. So I disagree with Ted Cruz on that.
Carr is courageous and a patriot, says the President of the United States, for what he said. So let's just play it again. What did he say about ABC after Kimmel's monologue, which included comments about Charlie Kirk and the suspect in his murder?
We have a license granted by us at the FCC, and that comes with it an obligation to operate in the public interest. But frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
And within hours of that warning, ABC pulled Kimmel off the air indefinitely. And Trump's assault on the media has it's gotten a lot louder even since then. Tonight, the president, in his second confrontation this week with ABC White House reporter Jonathan Karl, threw a lot of insults at Karl, his network, and other networks, all after he was asked this. Let me play it.
You've said that you restored free speech in America.
Yeah.
Is that free speech including for people who are harshly critical of you, for your political opponents, for people who say things you don't like?
I've become immune to
treat
it.
you unfairly?
I've become immune to it. There's never been a person that's had more unfair publicity than me, and that's why your network paid me $15 million, or $16 million, I believe, to be exact, George Slopadopoulos, and that's why CBS paid me a lot of money, too. And that's why I sued the New York Times 2 days ago for a lot of money. Because I'm winning. I mean, I'm winning the cases. And the reason I'm winning is because you're guilty, John. You're guilty. ABC is a terrible network, a very unfair network, and you should be ashamed of yourself. NBC is equally bad. I don't know who's worse. I think they're equally bad. And, you know, for you to stand there and act so innocent and ask me a question like that. But look, you paid a big price because you were dishonest, John. The reason I won that lawsuit was because you were dishonest. You were proven to be dishonest. And so you can't sit back and just say, oh, well, what do you think? You know, like you're some wonderful person. You're not a wonderful person. Frankly, you're a terrible reporter. You know it, and so do I.
I mean, can we just take a step back and realize that there's the insanity and absurdity of that entire exchange? For the record, and I guess it's got to just be said, Jonathan Karl is the best of the best, and certainly doesn't deserve to be spoken of as a terrible reporter, but Trump has free speech too. And on the point of suing the New York Times, it was just today that Trump's $15 billion lawsuit against the Times was flatly rejected by a federal judge nominated by former President George H.W. Bush, the judge calling it decidedly improper and impermissible, comparing the 85-page lawsuit to a megaphone for public relations.
ABC suspended Jimmy Kimmel after government pressure from the FCC, but the move now has ABC and its parent company Disney in crisis. So first, let me tell you tonight, we have new reporting and some special guests on the internal decision-making there, a company that has caved but may yet change gears again. Meanwhile, this Kimmel suspension has galvanized this national debate about Trump's effort to censor and silence critics and the press. And up top, I can tell you there is broad evidence of a broad plot here. Donald Trump's attacks, threats, and lawsuits against a whole range of outlets, speakers, and critics. And right now tonight, he ends this week with a fresh loss. There's that new unusual lawsuit he filed against the New York Times, basically like Kimmel, in effect, because he didn't appreciate or agree with their coverage of him, their criticism. Well, today a federal judge tossed that entire claimed $15 billion suit, noting it's decidedly improper and impermissible in its claims against the newspaper's First Amendment protected reporting. Now, Trump has lost. The suit is tossed. He can still respond in court. He can try to refile something that would, unlike this case, clear the very low hurdle of what is just a permissible suit. The case is technically separate from ABC, but clearly is the same playbook. And the Times fighting and winning quickly hangs over all of this tonight because it's the same playbook. And top Republicans also are not defending everything Trump is doing, as it's all cast in the open this week. A Republican senator warning the censorship effort should make everyone careful about any lines we cross in diminishing free speech. Democrats are united against it, speaking out, looking at ways they can deal with this, and they view it as a five-alarm fire and watershed fight. So that's just some of the initial reaction. There is also the law here, and we will continue to remind you of the law, exercising our free speech reporting and factual efforts within a whole national debate about what is factual and what is the law, because it's a likely violation of the First Amendment to pressure private companies to silence their views. The First Amendment prohibits the government from abridging free speech and free exercise of the press rights. And so that's from the beginning. Of all the things that have changed, that is supposed to held steady. And the Supreme Court has held that for a very long time. Just last year, it reaffirmed a core holding that government officials cannot coerce private parties in order to punish or suppress views the government disfavors, which is literally the censorship agenda that Trump and his FCC chief Carr have been pursuing. So the thing they're doing is currently illegal, unlawful, unconstitutional. Now, there's no split here on this issue in the court, which also makes this a stronger precedent, different from, for example, cases you followed where it's 5-4 and then maybe the court changes and a couple of years later it's 4-5, right? It changes. Well, let me show you. All 9 justices are for that ruling. You know, when we show you breaking coverage and we have the justices against and dissent, you'll notice that's blank. That's accurate because all 9 said the government cannot coerce businesses or media outlets, etc. You can't coerce them to suppress or change views. That's obviously against free speech in the First Amendment. The same case held, the First Amendment prohibits the government from relying on the threat of invoking legal sanctions and other means of coercion. For example, let's say you threaten it, but you haven't done it yet. That also is illegal if it's to achieve suppressing disfavored speech. So if Trump and Carr disfavor Jimmy Kimmel's criticism and make threats for it, that's unconstitutional. Again, who agrees with that? All 9 current justices, including, as you know, many appointed by Trump. So this is a big point here as we wrap up the week. As Trump loses in court over a different case against a different media outlet, these are the justices who would, of course, ultimately rule on any challenge to the FCC allegedly shaking down networks like ABC and Disney. But there's a big if. That would be if Disney and ABC fought this in court. If they stood up to the pressure like the New York Times is doing, like many citizens are doing. They have lawyers on retainer. They have billions of dollars. But so far, even though this is the court that awaits them, 9-0 against exactly the type of censorship that Trump and Carr are doing, but so far they've been giving in, rushing to surrender. Here's how the nonpartisan AP puts it, what's going on right now in your country. Trump's moves against media outlets mirror authoritarian approaches to silencing dissent. It's happening here now. There is pushback. There is even a court standing by that might very well side against that authoritarian effort, but this is happening now. Now, there's an acclaimed expert on authoritarianism, Timothy Snyder. He's warned that with Trump, this is exactly what you have to face, and cautioned against obeying in advance, even as some powerful people and companies appear to be doing that. Then others are speaking out. And it is easy sometimes for people to kind of look away and say, well, I don't know if this concerns me, or isn't that just entertainment, or isn't that just one channel? But free speech is tested in the breach. Whether it is a journalist or a dissident, a politician or a comedian, a musician, or someone doing interpretive dance that some autocrat doesn't like. And remember, we don't always get to pick the person. It is interesting that Ted Cruz is speaking out against Jimmy Kimmel, even though Jimmy Kimmel has obviously made jokes about Ted Cruz and plenty of other politicians in both parties. But that shows some level of intellectual consistency on this issue. It doesn't really matter whether you like Jimmy Kimmel or whether you ever watched his program. And when you look around, a lot of other people who weigh in with free speech, whether you think it's funny or not, or you agree with their politics or not, across late night, we are seeing them stand up and speaking the way they do about this alleged cowardice of those already bowing to Trump's censorship through private companies. And we know that those companies do care about the bottom line and live in a regulated environment. But the Trump second term is serving up a level of autocratic challenge that we didn't always face in the first, where we have to decide as a country, as people, and those people involved in running certain companies have to decide where the line is. Can you uphold the First Amendment? And do you have what some would call courage, but others would call the basic prudence?
The legal precedent is clear. Look, Ted Cruz, I'm going to say this, and this is not me defending Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is a brilliant man. Everything I've heard about him, normally people say, I don't like the guy. No one likes Ted Cruz, seemingly. I've never heard people question his raw intelligence. He was, he had the best universities, and even at those universities, he was the best student, bright guy. He's largely chosen to use his powers for evil. So what's interesting here is he realizes, as a bright man who's a well-educated lawyer and all of that, that Trump doesn't have a leg to stand on here with regards to his attack on the First Amendment. And that's why he's basically saying, well, I don't agree with this. Through a mixture of, I don't think it's going to work, I think it's bad for the First Amendment, and if it does work, well, then it's gonna boomerang back on us sooner and harder than we think. But you can see there, the Supreme Court has already laid it out here. The court cases have already happened. This is not a gray zone. This is settled law. What Trump is doing to Kimmel, he would lose in court. The critical question will be, is ABC willing to defend him? Because what we've seen with Trump is that in some cases the courts go with him, and they probably shouldn't. But in some cases he loses. But in many cases, the second time around, Trump wins because everybody backs down. Remember the comments that were made about Trump and what he did to Jean Carroll, and a specific word was used, right? The R word, that what he did to her, right? At least allegedly, according to the judge. Now, the judge said you can interpret what he did to her as that. And so when that word was used on, I think that was ABC. I forget which network it was, George Stephanopoulos. He could have, and the network could have gone to court and say, all we're doing is using the word the judge used. And they would have had a really hard time to win that case against the network, because it wasn't malicious and there was a basis in fact. What happened in that case, though, was that they didn't even do the case. They settled, but in many people's estimation, the settlement was, in effect, a bribe-style payment to Donald Trump. And we've seen other cases go that way as well. But if they fight, Trump's already lost this case in court.